The 2020 Overwatch League season is finally in the bag, and our grand champions have been crowned. Today, Jake and I break it all down here on the Owl's Nest. Welcome back to all of our regulars, and hello to any new viewers that may be finding us. If this is your first time visiting the Owl's Nest, make sure you hit that subscribe button and like the video, turn on the bell for notifications, and leave us some comments about how you like the show. So the Grand Finals weekend is finally over. The whole 2020 season has been wrapped up with a nice big bow. Back-to-back champions now in the San Francisco Shock. But of course, we had a whole weekend worth of Overwatch, not just the one match. And so we're going to kind of go over everything that we can here. And where I'd like to start is with probably the biggest, and depending on who you are, maybe the only disappointment of the weekend. Jake, what happened to Philly? 2 sweeps.
They definitely got beat down at the Grand Finals weekend. It was rough. I don't think even I expected it to be that hard for them. I did think they would, probably struggle overall, right? Having already lost to the Shock. But, just as Seoul did, right? And then, Seoul came out so strong and finished second place. So I think for Philly, this is obviously a disappointment. I think for them, it has to, be looked back upon as just kind of like a failure in the 11th hour. I don't think they're a weak team, and I think there were flashes of greatness. Like I think Alarm actually played really well in both series, despite them getting rolled pretty much. But yeah, for them, it's hard to know what broke down. It seems like it's got to come down to some teamwork coordination issue. I think they didn't play up to the par that we started to expect from Philly. Where for most of the regular season they had been just so dominant. Had been playing so well against strong teams and weak teams alike, just very consistent. And then that just kind of evaporated at the Grand Finals.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at the regular season records for all of these teams, Philly had 2 losses, Shanghai had 2 losses, I think the Shock had 3. Dynasty going in, I think with an even 12-12 record. Now, the fact that Philly had only, they got a chance to play against Seoul, they got a chance to play against the Shanghai Dragons. Do you think that it might have had something to do with those both being APAC region teams and Philly not having any experience playing against them up to that point?
Maybe you could chalk it up to that. I don't think that's entirely fair, though, considering, the Shock played the same teams. So I don't know if you can really call that. I don't know. I don't know if there is going to be a satisfying answer or excuse for Philly. I think that's the bottom line in my opinion. Like I think ultimately it comes down to them. It's something that you can only really speculate on as an outsider. As dramatic as it was, right, with it, a lot of those matches not really being close and being pretty big stomps, especially against Shanghai. I feel like you have to look at issues that are beneath the surface, right? Like internally, how are they feeling? Were players in a bad mental place? Were they, not communicating as they normally do? It definitely seemed like something was amiss, and it went beyond, I think, just individual performance or gameplay. I think it did look like a little bit deeper, like a sort of systemic team issue. And those type of issues, I know all too well. It's just impossible to know what is going on from the outside in a specific sense. You can only really say generally, wow, there was that dramatic issue. But I think for the fans, it's really only the team could say what went wrong really in their minds.
Well, there's always next year, as they say, so we'll be looking forward to what the Philadelphia Fusion can do in the 2021 season. But for me, I think the standout performance here, especially when you look back over the season and how they did up until this point, Seoul coming in with a 12-12 record, but playing like a completely different team. They took the Shock all the way to a Game 5 before being knocked down into the losers bracket, sweeping the Philadelphia Fusion, and then defeating the Shanghai Dragons in a Game 5 as well. Talk to me a little bit here about the Seoul Dynasty and what it was that sort of set them apart and allowed them to get to the Grand Finals where they got to take on the Shock.
For Seoul, I think if you had to put it down to just one thing, I would give the honors to Gesture Hog. I mean, he went absolutely sicko, at the Grand Finals weekend. I think it's possibly fair to say that he had the strongest overall Roadhog performance of the entire Grand Finals weekend. I don't think he was head and shoulders above other players. I think with Shock having Super Smurf and Choi, all actually looking pretty good on the hero. And Shanghai as well having good performances on the hero. So I don't think you can say Jester was absolutely crushing the competition, but he did just look like the most consistent performer. And I think that contributed to Seoul's decision to play creative on the Ana very, very consistently, like a lot more than Shock, for instance, played the Ana. And I think what it came down to is wanting to enable gesture and having those nano boosts to give to the Roadhog, having sleep darts and bionades for the enemy Roadhog that allow you to get that +1 advantage, allow your Roadhog to really take over the game. So that was definitely a lot of confidence in gesture that made them play that strat while other teams played a little bit more zen. And I think it showed because gesture, I mean, he had an incredible performance. You can't question it.
So the matchup against the Shanghai Dragons, obviously they went all the way to the Game 5. There was somewhere in there, I think someone called it a Shang 9. Shanghai making a few mistakes here and there. Besides gesture, what do you think was the overall tipping point for the Seoul Dynasty in that Shanghai match?
Well, I would say they definitely, as much as I was just hyping gesture and talking about his incredible performance, it's not like it's grand finals weekend, right? Like there's no way one player can carry, or anything close to that. So you have to look next to players like Prophet and Fitz, who in my opinion both had incredible performances. Prophet in particular had just some truly insane moments on the Ashe and the Hanzo, but Fitz is so uniquely skilled at this flanking Widowmaker style. That's like sort of the style I grew to associate with him throughout the season is, he would just show up on the flank and hit those very close range headshots that are like basically do or die. There's like so much pressure on those headshots. And he's so great at like being patient and waiting for the lineup when somebody's not looking at him. He'll like wait for the perfect shot, and I don't know. He just played really, really well with that style. So the snipers definitely came together for Seoul Dynasty. In the double sniper meta is what you need. But it's one thing to know that; it's another to perform against the best players in the world. So across the board, I think there wasn't really a weak spot. I think Marvel also has looked like a great Sigma consistently. He had all those crazy clips. I always remember that clip of him like 180ing with the accretion to stun the Sombra from behind him. It was like so nasty in the regular season. But I think he played a consistent game too, along with Creative and Toby. Like the whole roster came together. But it's just the nature of the comp that the snipers and the Hog are sort of like the, playmaking superstars of that composition, and they're put in that position. But it's one thing to be put in that position, it's another to succeed.
Yeah, and obviously I don't think there's anyone going to argue that Seoul definitely deserved to be there in the grand finals. Speaking of the Hogs, both Gesture and Super, the moment that I can't really get out of my head is on King's Row and the flanking Hogs we got from both sides way in the back line on point A. What was happening there? Do you think that that's something that just sort of happened in the moment, or was that something that was planned out? Because it's not something that I feel like we see very often.
No, I think the idea is I mean, it sort of makes sense that it happened multiple times to me because Roadhog is often going to take the flank through the hotel on King's Row. That's like a very classic flank for a hero like Roadhog, who's very hard to burst down, so he's not scared to just walk around that corner and look for a kill. And potentially even go behind through the choke and maybe look for a hook from the back window where a Widowmaker might be sitting or something like that. But then you find yourself in that position and your team's already lost the fight, like the picks just went the other way and you're now behind the enemy. Well, what are you going to do now? For one, there's no easy way to reset on King's Row. You're walking a very long distance to jump off the map and you'll probably die trying to get back to your team because you can get slept and hooked and it's not looking good for you once your whole team, all your teammates are dead or back to the spawn. So going behind is like the next best option. And I think it did in general when players made that play, it did have good impact. Even though like the teams didn't always win the next fight immediately, the Roadhog generally was able to go up that high ground from behind and force the enemy snipers to play in a much less safe position where now they're when they go out onto the balcony area of King's Row, it's much less safe. It's much more exposed to enemy Widow sight lines, to getting pushed by enemy snipers. The snipers want to be up in that top hallway, but when Roadhog comes from behind them, they really can't. So even if Roadhog is not necessarily getting kills, he is applying a lot of pressure from that position. So I think overall, it's not like a bad play. It is definitely a little bit zany, but yeah, it's sort of making the most of a strange situation on Roadhog.
So, we saw the Dynasty, their performance throughout the entire tournament was phenomenal. Taking, again, the Shock to a Game 5, beating Shanghai in that Game 5, and then obviously in the Grand Finals, the first Grand Finals of which was not a clean sweep, but ultimately they fell to the San Francisco Shock 4-2. What do you think that the Shock had in their corner that allowed them to tip that balance?
I think the Shock are just absolutely stacked to the teeth. I think that's the why I thought they'd be the team to win this season at the start of the season. It just comes down to the strength of roster here, and there's not too many coaches in the league that I think are like a big deal in terms of making their team better. But I think I rate Krusty the highest of them all personally. He seems like his from what I hear from him and what I hear about him, he seems like he has his head completely in the right place, and that he offers a lot to any team he's a part of. And the success that he's been a part of, whether it was when he was on Boston and having a huge impact on that team, and then they immediately struggled when he left. It's pretty strong evidence. And then also with the Shock, obviously having this massive turnaround, picking up Krusty since last year. So I think he's such a value add. And then you take a value add coach like Krusty and you put him in a roster that is like, Violet might be the best player in the world. It doesn't really matter in Overwatch League if you can play all the roles generally, because you generally just play your main role. But Violet is like a 4,600 SR on all 3 roles. That's absurd, actually. Like almost no one. I don't think anybody else has done that before. So it's truly he's one of those players who he could play DPS in the Overwatch League or tank in the Overwatch League. I really believe. But he's so good at support. It's like, okay, sure, play your best role. But that's like such a crazy accomplishment in my mind that. So I have to think he's like completely ridiculous. You've got Moth, who I just did the review on Moth, but he's playing a very conservative style for the Shock, very consistent style. He's not like he's on main support, but all he has to do is stay alive and be consistent, because the rest of the team is making aggressive forward plays and making space. So what they need there in that position is consistency, and Moth delivers. And then you've got the flexibility between Super, Smurf, and Choi, which is a great triplet tank line there to basically fill whatever you need in terms of tanks. And even having options on like who plays Roadhog. I saw an interview from Krusty talking about Choi's Roadhog being more of a line holder, mid-range position fighter, where Super wants to be much more aggressive and take the lead, pushing into the enemy team, and Smurf wants to go for off angles. So they have like 3 different Hog players, all extremely competent, but with 3 different styles that they can kind of throw at a team throughout a series. So the tank line looks absolutely devastating, especially in this meta. And on DPS, it's absolutely ridiculous, right? You've got a player like Striker and Ons together in this meta is like disgusting. Striker is another candidate, I think, for greatest of all time. Definitely a DPS focused player, but I think his ability to play Tracer at such an absurdly high level, like basically, I don't know, you can't really carry obviously at this level, but he had such a high impact on Koth. The fact that Koth has played multiple times a series, it's so huge for the Shock. Like they were just crushed on Koth, and in no small thanks to Striker's Tracer.
So final question I have for you, and I realize that there is no easy answer to this, if there is an answer at all. But with the Shock back-to-back champions, undisputedly the best here in the league, what is it going to take in the future to dethrone the San Francisco Shock?
I think it'll take, frankly, another team to make that level of investment in a championship roster. Because the Shock has, to be fair, they've paid a high price for this roster, to be sure. Like, I don't know exactly what the players are paid, but like, if they keep this roster or any semblance of it, they are going to be paying a lot of money, because these, you won 2 championships in a row. These players all deserve to be like the top highest paid players in the league. Like, they really are. All of them are really that good. So there's an argument that like it should be impossible for Shock to maintain all these players on the same roster. Like, it's just too stacked to be fair, and that they're going to need to re-sign people, and it might be too expensive for them. And that's like the hope for other teams, that some of these players can get traded away. Because I think Shock is just disgustingly stacked, and beating them, like, I'm not sure the 6 players exist to beat them. Like the dream team, whatever. I don't know. They are the dream team right now. So as far as beating them goes, I think it's going to take either Shock losing players or another team really stepping up to the plate big time and just going all out, getting like the best player they can possibly find on every position, and paying absurd buyouts and stuff like that. So in short, it's going to be extremely difficult.
All right, well, that's going to be it for the Owl's Nest today, everyone. Thank you so much. Before you go, make sure to click that bell to subscribe to our channel, get all the notifications on the latest videos. And if your favorite local radio station isn't running the CheckpointXP national radio show, you can get it on demand wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're following Jake at JakeOW on Twitter and Jake_OW on Twitch and YouTube. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, remember to stay on that payload.